Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who have found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience, where they felt stuck, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others and finding possibility for yourself. Let's get into this week's conversation. Welcome back to another episode of Off the Comma. We are 2+ years strong and running. Very excited about that. There's been a lot of conversations lately about the podcast and about some of the energy that it's creating and some of the people that are coming to the podcast and some of the other interesting inquiries that I've been getting about the podcast lately from people who are interested in doing their own podcasts and kind of want to hear what my experience is. And even recently, I've had somebody reach out, probably to many podcasters, but wanted to know if we'd be interested in potentially creating content for an independent radio station. So lots I'm exploring right now with the podcast. So I'm very excited about that as we go to, at this point in time, today is Halloween of 2025. So kind of exciting to see what comes up in the next couple of months. But all that aside, that's me. That's talking about me. I'm very grateful to be able to do this work. I'm very grateful to be here and to be able to have these really powerful conversations, and just also to be a listener, to hear and honor the stories that so many people come here to share. And that's what this is all about. Today's no exception. And today we're going to be talking to John. I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a moment. John is somebody who I have not met before. And so today is going to be our opportunity to get to know each other. I'm going to learn about John through his story today. Lots of interesting things in the background that I believe are going to be a part of his story. So I'm excited to learn how these different pieces fit together for him. And so I'm going to stop rambling, John. I'm going to hand it over to you so we can get into your story. Introduce yourself to us. Why don't you start with how would you like to be known? And then what else would you like for us to know about you?
Hello, Paul. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Happy Halloween. Always a good day. I'll probably be watching a horror movie later. Big horror movie fan.
Nice.
How I'd like to be known is a nice guy, a good thinker, and a good writer. Little bit about myself. I like to think of myself as the most overeducated fiction writer in America. And this very may be. I have a 2 doctorates and a master's in technical fields.
Oh, wow.
I've been a practicing veterinarian. I have a DVM, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. Then I went back to school in public health, got a master's and a PhD in public health epidemiology. And that is not the study of the skin or of insects. It is the study of disease patterns in populations. A lot of statistics and a lot of survey type research that's done with that. And then I became a medical writer. I did that for quite a few years. And now I'm really excited to be doing fiction writing. Lifelong reader. And I've always, as most writers, whether you're a technical writer, copywriter, or whatever, most writers would love to write fiction too, great novel, right? So I'm really thrilled to actually be writing fiction and getting it published. So that's going to be my, till the end of my life, I'll be doing that.
Cool. If I may, I want to kind of reflect a couple of things back, and I'll do this throughout the conversation, John. So anytime I reflect something, if it's not accurate, correct me, right? So, first of all, an acknowledgement. As a writer yourself, I get a lot of guests who come here who either are in the process of writing a book or books, have written books or books, or are envisioning the possibility of writing books or books. And it's interesting because I think, there are people who are writers and that's what they seek to do. And then there are people who have lived something powerful and then have been asked to tell the story numerous times and then feel challenged or called to capture it in writing so that more and more people can hear the story. So it's kind of cool, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is that another person who is writing for all of the reasons that are yours, but joining this community of people who also are storytellers in all
Right.
of its various forms. But I also see, and you're the second guest in a couple of weeks that I will have talked to now, who has done all these really kind of interesting and amazing and somewhat seemingly different things in their lives that have a thread that comes through it too. So, I mean, to me, tell me if I'm wrong, I see you as curious, an explorer, maybe even someone who likes to figure things out to a degree. Is any
Yeah,
of
I
that?
mean, I think curiosity is a huge part of being a good writer. They always say, "What if?" The writer's plots and characters are based a lot on questions. What if
Mm,
this happened? What if you captured an alien organism and it was going to threaten the world? And you got the Andromeda strain. These things kind
hmm.
of come up like that. So I think curiosity is an important part of it. Um, and so you're right in that respect. I've always been curious about things to this day. If I see something I don't understand, for example, I have three great loves and always had throughout my educational experiences.
Hmm.
One was history. I love military history. I've been studying it for close to 60 years. And so if I see something that I don't understand or I hadn't seen before, I look it up,
Hmm.
research it. The other is fiction writing and reading. Been an avid reader. My parents instilled reading in us when we were kids, and
Hmm.
always loved reading fiction as well. And the third one was science.
Nice.
And that's another thing where I'll look things up if I don't understand it or something that's out of my experience or training.
Mm.
So, uh, really, for the fiction writing, I'm just circling back to something that I've always loved. But when you pursue science, you kind of have to put other things on the back burner,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
and science was the most logical career choice, the most paths open to you
Yeah.
in technical disciplines.
And yet it seems that rich career and all of the things that you learned through study, and I also understand that science isn't always glamorous because study doesn't always guarantee learning. Sometimes it's
Right.
disappointing and frustrating that you don't learn what you thought you were going to learn, right? But all those things allow you to then circle back and like uh, I would just imagine, I should say, that all of these things like the fodder for what you could create in your own imaginary universe through writing has got to be just limitless.
Right. And that's a nice thing about having multiple interests and about having uh, a science background. I can tackle things like techno thrillers, which my first novel, Project Suicide, was a techno thriller.
Mm,
Um, that other people, you can try to do it, but you run in a real risk of stepping into a realm that you don't completely understand and
mm-hmm.
looking stupid.
Mm,
There's the old saying, write what you know. And,
yeah.
and that's an old cliche, and people now will argue against that. But there's a reason that Michael Crichton, the physician, wrote techno thrillers. There's
Mm-hmm.
a reason that John Grisham, the lawyer, wrote legal thrillers. And
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King, most of his characters are drunken school teachers. I mean,
Right.
they're all writing what they know. Now
Yeah.
you can branch off of that, but you do it at your peril.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do more research because when you start stepping into realms that, and you see this with people using Google or misusing Google, you step into areas that you have an incomplete understanding of, and you grab
Mm-hmm.
a little knowledge. Well, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing
Mm-hmm.
because you're
Mm-hmm.
liable to misinterpret how that's being used. And we've all read books where people have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Mm-hmm.
roll our eyes and we want to throw the book down. How can he say that? That doesn't happen, or whatever.
Yeah, I
So,
think I'm a big sci-fi person and I love fiction because the work that I do involves reality to a great degree. So I don't like to read more books about reality. I like to switch gears and go to something very different and kind of escape and so forth. And yet, to your point, and then we're going to jump into your story because I'm getting us off track. To your point, when I read sci-fi and fantasy, yes, absolutely, I can enjoy a movie or a book that has dinosaurs and laser beams, to use a
Right.
figure of speech that one of my friends, I didn't coin that term, he did. Popcorn and just brainless, right? But the stuff that I really enjoy is the stuff that is based on plausibility, right? Yes, it is fantastic. Yes, it is futuristic. Yes, it is, stuff that doesn't happen or exist today. But the author, like Frank Herbert, for example, Dune, 35,000 years
Right.
into humanity's future, and they're doing essentially magic and things like that. But he bridges the gap between the implausible and the plausible to at least make it possible for you to cross that bridge, even if this stuff doesn't happen today,
Right.
right?
And that at its essence, I think science fiction is speculation based on a little bit of science.
Hmm.
Um, I teach a course in basic research for fiction writers. And I always say in that your story is not the research.
Hmm.
Your journey, the obstacles, the goals that they want to get, the relationships, that's what people want to read. But the spice in the soup, the thing that gives it the extra flavor and hooks people, is the research. And
Hmm.
if you sound like you know what you're talking about, and sometimes that's all it has to be, sound like you know what you're talking about
Hmm. Hmm.
convincingly, people will go, I'm going to believe this guy. Because
Hmm.
let's face it, we're telling lies as fiction.
Hmm.
We're
Hmm.
making things up. It's like a con man. And you want it to be a believable lie, though. And
Right.
that's where the research comes in. You put
Nice.
enough of that, and a little goes a long way. You can make it sound like a technical manual, and that turns people off as well.
Hmm.
But the research gets them to want to buy the Brooklyn Bridge. You fed them the facts. They say, oh, okay, I'm getting a behind the scenes look. This guy knows what he's talking about. Now, when you play with those facts and go off into unusual directions, they tend to buy it.
Hmm.
That's human nature.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I've kind of sort of taken us on a tangent, but all of this is relevant to you and your experience and your story. Let's jump in. Let's get into your story, and I have a feeling more of this is going to shape out in the story that you tell us today. Before we get into the 5 questions, the first question I always ask every guest is, John, as you think ahead to the next 30, 35, 40 minutes in telling your story with us today, what intention would you have for yourself in the next time frame together?
Um, for me, I think I love to storytell and I love to teach. So for me, it's a form of entertainment. Um,
Mm.
and hopefully, I can pass on a few nice nuggets that other people in the audience, the listeners, will be able to use and take that.
Hmm.
It's like when I'm doing my course on research or a basic course on firearms for fiction writers. I always say, I hope that you'll come away with this with just a couple little tools that you can use, or at least know that you areas where you need to ask questions.
Hmm. Okay. My intention today is to support you in your intention. Obviously, we're going to hold space for you to be able to tell your story, but that in for people out there who are listening, there will be people who see a little bit of themselves in you and in your story, make them feel a little bit more connected, a little less alone, and in the best of cases, maybe inspired or empowered to go out and do something they've been wanting to do. Let's jump in with the first question. So, John, where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
There's been a few places I can two immediately come to mind, and I'll go with the second one because that's the one that was most, let's say, making lemonade out of lemons. And I
Mm,
use cliches like that in my writing, just so people know.
okay.
But that's what came to mind. I left the corporate world. I was working for in a biomedical group of a big corporation,
Mhm.
and I left that in 2004. I got tired of basically the corporate crap. It's got its own stresses and its own
Mm,
stupidities, as everyone probably knows. Just read
mhm.
what is it? Was it Scott Adams with his thing about corporate America that he does Dilbert? But
Hmm.
so I left that and became a technical or medical writer, and basically writing journal articles for companies, writing their studies up into articles, doing website content for things like that, and had quite a successful career going with it. Built up a client list, and then the Great Recession came,
Mm.
2008, and when things like that hit, corporate America tucks up. They don't hire contractors.
Hmm.
So I basically, my income was gone for a period of 6 months to a year, or at least
Mm.
very reduced. Now, fortunately, my wife still had a corporate job and she was working. So we had that coming in. But I was like, well, what do I do at this point? And that's when we get back to everybody always wants to write a book. Any writer of any kind wants to write a book, a novel. So what this gave me was the gift of time. Now I still had to do it,
Hmm.
but it was you say you want to write a book, you want to write a novel. Now you have a period of time when you could actually try it. And so I started working on a thriller novel. And after about 6, 7 months, I completed it, a draft anyway.
Mm.
And it's still on my computer and probably always will be. Uh, but you know, it's it's always, you ask any writer, oh, what was your first book? Well, the first one I wrote or the first one that got published. It's always, there's a whole bunch of trunk novels in the background that never
Hmm.
going to see the light of day, or unlikely to. They might.
Hmm.
Um,
As sorry to jump in, or that's the little Easter egg you leave behind that someday when you're no longer here and somebody else
right.
discovers
I
it,
mean,
right?
there's some of my favorite Hemingways after his death.
Hmm.
Hemingway's a big. I love Hemingway. He's one of my influences.
Hmm.
But so yeah, so it gave me the gift to do that, and not that it. The point is not that it did not get published, but the point is it got me started. And I
Hmm.
started working on some short stories. Again, most of the first ones were crap. Um, and wrote another novel that wasn't published. And it kind of, so even when my business picked up again, it got me hooked into fiction writing. And that was a great creative outlet for me.
Okay, so I know there's a lot more to share here, but you've experienced this, like so many people, you've experienced this kind of comma and pause during the Great Recession, the housing crisis of 2008. But what I believe I'm hearing you say is, I also saw opportunity in it and took advantage of that opportunity, and then decided to pursue something that had been on your radar for quite some time. So, like, let's jump in and write this book. And it sounds like, as you shared, you ended up doing that and you accomplished that and you got the draft written, and like you said, that was kind of your first draft getting you started. What else would you tell us about what made that period challenging for you? Maybe what were some of the challenges of getting started on writing, or
Well,
following
the,
through, sticking with it?
the biggest challenge, and I think that's a lot of people face, is writing a book. It's daunting because
Hmm.
you think of it like, I got to write a story that's 90,000 words long.
Mm.
I got to write 90,000 words. But what I learned, and I was fortunate at another comma in my life back before this, when I was trying to decide to go on to my doctorate, go back to school, get my master's, and that only takes you so far. So I was thinking of getting the doctorate in public health. And that's very daunting as well, because not only anybody who's done it knows it's not just classwork like it is
Mm.
with a master's, most masters. You have a dissertation. You have to do a research project.
Hmm.
Oh, and that's daunting. But what I learned is you don't do the research project all right, but once you do a little bit every day.
Mm.
And that's the same for writing a novel. You're not writing 90,000 words. You're writing 500 or 1,000 a day over a period of months.
Hmm.
And that makes it much less daunting because I don't have to sit down and think, oh my God, I'm writing 90,000 words. I got to sit down and write 500 or 1,000. over a period
Mm,
of an hour or two and say, okay, that's my brain's shut off from this today, and I'm going to do some other stuff,
hmm.
some marketing or whatever. It's kind of like with the alcoholic. If you think, oh my God, I can't drink for the rest of my life, that stops a lot of people. But they
Right.
always say, it's a day at a time. I'm not going to drink today.
Hmm.
And so it's the same thing. I'm going to write 500 or 1,000 words today, and that's what I'm going
Mm.
to do. And tomorrow I'm going to do it again.
It's like so many other things too, fitness goals, you just got to do a little workout
Right.
every day and in time you'll see the results. Or I think about, oh, I had an example and it's kind of escaped me, but what you were saying really prompted that thought. But let me ask a different question then. So it seems like in order for you to get to that point, you had to make some kind of a mental shift because often we look at the thing we want to accomplish, the top of the mountain, that's where we start. And you somehow, you tell me if I'm wrong, but you somehow were able to shift from I'm not just going to leap to the top of the mountain. I've got to look at this as the journey and how do I break the steps up? What enabled you to get to that piece of wisdom that you just shared with us?
Well, I think it was the journey that I had before,
Hmm.
doing the dissertation and even just leaving veterinary practice to try to do research work.
Hmm.
The very first things that I tried to do was in a parasitology program at my old school, the vet school. And I worked with a guy who was really great as a mentor. And he said, and this was a great piece of it, he goes, you've been a practicing veterinarian. You're used to doing. We have to thinking. We have to
Mm.
get you used to planning ahead and thinking rather than I'm going to give a vaccination now, I'm going to do a spay, I'm going to treat this next case. So that's a mind shift all by itself. And
Hmm.
so that got me to where not only do you recognize that you can succeed.
Hmm.
I've done a lot of acting and singing as well as creative outlets,
Hmm.
theater and stuff. I did that for many years. Not anymore, but I did it for many years.
Hmm.
And you gain confidence once you do you do a play successfully. The next one's a little easier. The
Hmm.
next one's a little easier. You're getting to the point where you know you can accomplish it. And that takes away a lot of the stress
Hmm.
of trying it,
Hmm.
trying anything new, because you know you succeeded before and nothing succeeds like success.
Well,
Another
and
terrible cliche.
yeah, well, and I hear you kind of reflecting on and sharing with us a lot of self-reflection, right? Like really being able to look back at the past, look back at evidence of your capability, rely on the things that you learned to do. Like you said, like I was able to go from looking at the top of the mountain to measuring it out in steps because I had all this experience with research and practicing medicine and doing things in a measured and paced manner. So it seems like that reflection is important. But then, of course, I would just automatically jump to the assumption that you're good at self reflection because you are a writer and a creator.
Right. I mean, like I said, you got to be curious. You got to be good at self reflection. You've got to be, it's like the actor. You've got to be able to let out your emotion, let out even the dark parts of your emotion, the anger, the the lust, the wanting revenge, murderous impulses. You have to let
Mm,
all that come through to make something that is unrestrained, unconstrained. The same with
mm,
the actor's performance. You're bringing it all through you, and you're letting these things out as the character.
hmm, hmm.
So it's the same kind of thing.
So the writer is like the actor in that even though they're writing about someone, some things, some places that are very much outside of them, like your fingerprints are in it all
Yeah,
over it. You're not
yeah,
just the observer of the story, you are in the DNA of the story as well.
right. And that's very much what method acting is, and that's certainly
Hmm.
you bring things through yourself and your own life experience, the things that you have inside you, what they call the golden box that
Hmm.
tap into. and you bring that into the characters to make the characters real for the audience. Likewise,
Hmm.
the characters and the plots and stuff in writing come through you,
Hmm.
and that makes them real to the audience, or to the readership. That's what we said about research too.
Hmm.
You know,
Let me,
you don't want those rolling the eye moments. You want
yeah.
people to buy into what you're saying. You know, they've looked behind the curtain and they know you're in charge. They know
Hmm.
you know what you're talking about, and they know it gives them license to follow and believe.
Here's another question for you. Before I go back to the five, I'll go to question two here in a moment. But on this topic of you have now written this first novel, right? This first draft, the Getting Started book, is based on what you've just shared with us about you being in the story. Was there any there were lots of parts of you, I'm sure, that had to come through in that story. Is there any specific thing or any important thing to share that as you were writing that story, it was processing a part of you?
Well, it's again, you're writing what you know. I set the story at the time we were living in Ohio, and we had friends and spent a lot of time in northern Michigan. So basically the story took place between Ohio and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
It's things like that that you make it you make your research job easier.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you know these areas when you're writing about them and you've seen them, it's going to be more realistic for a reader. I
Mm-hmm.
always say that in my research thing. It's like a little goes a long way, but you're going to do a lot more research than you put on the page. And that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
because just the fact that you did the research makes your writing more powerful. Just
Mm-hmm.
like as an actor, you're going to create a biography for your character. It may
Mm-hmm.
be a page, it may be 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. Some people write, 20 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And just the fact that you did that, even though it may not be in the script, your biography may not ever show up as
Mm-hmm.
something the audience needs to know. You know it. And
Yeah.
the fact that you know it makes the character stronger. Similarly, when you know the research, when you know the background of the characters, it makes them more powerful on the page.
Mm. Yeah, to me, it's like also looking at a map. If I looked at a map and I knew that the border of my vision was the end and there was nothing else out there, it makes what I'm looking at a little bit less interesting. But in a real map, if I'm looking at a city and I know there's terrain around the city, it makes the city I'm looking at more interesting, even if I never pan over to the
Right,
countryside.
right.
Let's jump into the second question. So you shared with us this comma that you were sitting on at the time, that you had this transition and you decided to pursue your writing career. What did that create for you?
Well, it created a whole new creative outlet. And I was looking for that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I had done acting in community theater level for about 15 years, both in
Mm-hmm.
New Jersey and Southern Ohio. And it wasn't as fulfilling as it had when I started.
Mm.
Um, One of my acting coaches famously said, uh, there comes a time when it's no longer fun just to do another show.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Plus, as I was getting older, as you get to late middle age, the better parts dry up. You're not young enough for the heroes, and you're not old enough for the wise old characters. You're kind of in between. And third, there's a
Mm.
lot of drama in community theater behind the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm.
gets a little hard to take. Performance is always fun, but there's 6 weeks, 7 weeks of rehearsal up to that performance, and
Right.
there's clicks and there's gossip and there's all kinds of stuff which I've never been a fan of.
Mm.
So I was looking for something creative, and fiction writing filled that role. And in some respects, it was even much better than the because it's just me. I
Mm-hmm.
there's no drama that's not of my own making.
Yeah. Well, the entire cast is under your control, and the entire
Right.
cast is
Right.
actually all an extension of you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So a big shift, right? You got to transition from something else that was a creative outlet in your life that was starting to run its course. Now you're able to go into not only a new outlet, but it also kind of ticks the boxes or scratches or removes some of the, I'll use the word issues, maybe that's too strong, that were associated with the last creative
Right,
outlet.
right.
Okay. So you're moving forward then in this new kind of writing outlet. Well, let me jump into the third question, and then if there's more story to tell, by all means, continue. But based on what you've shared with us about the comma, what would you say you have learned about yourself as a result of sitting on that comma back then?
Well, I would include all the commas in a row that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, number one, you learn that you can do these things.
Mm-hmm.
You've succeeded at similar things before, which gives you confidence that you can succeed again.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the other is this one day at a time thing. Take, don't, and that's kind of what writer's block is in some respects. A lot of people start. I break writers that I've known or people I know who want to write into groups.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of uh, one of the people who always wanted to write fiction and never do.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's people who start fiction, and starting a novel's fairly easy. None of it's easy, but fairly easy because you got a great idea. Maybe you have an idea for a couple characters. You rush 2, 3, 4, 5,000 words that you're excited about. Then you hit that, okay, what now?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what writer's block is. You're at a point where you don't know where to take it. And then you start to look at this daunting, I still got 80,000 words to write.
Mm-hmm.
And that stops a lot of people and they go back to the easy part. I had another idea and
Mm-hmm.
they write it. Then there's people who complete a book and they continually polish it. They never write anything else. They just polish and submit, polish and submit, polish and submit. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's people who actually complete and become writers. They write short stories, they write novels, things like that. Maybe they never get published, maybe they self-publish, whatever. I've never self-published, but that's for some people great. So it's this idea of knowing you can finish something and to take that daunting task and to break it up into the one day at a time that'll
Mm-hmm.
get you there. Um, that's the biggest thing that I think I learned over this process of the last 25 years.
Mm-hmm. You strike me as very, and I've reflected this earlier, and you talked about this. You strike me as very optimistic. You strike me as very pragmatic. You've shared with us how you have, the experience and the ability to call on that experience to break up these big tasks into small steps and keep yourself moving forward. Those all sound like great traits and characteristics. It couldn't have always been simple or easy or feeling great.
But I agree. And the other thing you've got to do, you've got to learn in writing is a thick skin.
Mm,
Rejection is not only part of the thing, it's a large part. It's the norm.
mm-hmm,
Getting accepted is the unusual part, especially
mm,
with so many people now doing self-publishing and stuff. There's oceans of fiction written out there, some of it good, some of it not so good,
mm-hmm,
where that never used to be the case. There were always just gatekeepers. There were
mm-hmm,
some vanity presses and things like that. People wrote a story for their grandchildren or whatever, but there was always the gatekeepers, the publishers, the literary agents, things like that.
mm-hmm,
And those with self-publishing have kind of gone out the window. So there's
mm,
this ocean of stuff that people are inundated with, even like magazine publishers. Uh, you know, online magazine. I've gotten some stories accepted where I'm very flattered because they said we got 900 submissions.
mm-hmm.
and we're picking yours as one of the ones we want to, one of the 20 we want to put in.
Wow.
That makes you feel good.
Sure.
But you get an awful lot of we read your stuff and it really doesn't fit our needs, blah blah blah. Stephen King was another one of my influences. He talks about, and I think this is funny, especially he's been so successful in his writing. He says what you need to do is he started out back when you actually got rejection letters.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
he said you drive a nail in your attic into a beam, and with each rejection you get, you shove it on the nail, and you
Uh-huh.
shove it on the nail. And he goes, and you know what? By the time that nail is filled, it's time to drive another nail. Rejection is the norm.
Right.
And you have to learn that it doesn't necessarily mean your writing is not good. Um, you may just really not have been what they were looking for that particular anthology or that particular genre of writing.
Hmm.
Um, and you've got to learn that, put that aside and just keep going.
Well, and it strikes me too, right? Like amongst all of us humans, there's this continuum. There are those, like you just described, who actively walk into rejection. Sometimes that's related to professions, like you described,
Right?
writers, salespeople, good example, right? There are those of us who actively try to avoid rejection at all costs, right? And then there's this whole continuum, this whole spectrum in between, right? Question for John is, what has changed for you as a result of sitting on those commas?
Um, you grow. You grow as a writer. You grow as a person. I am more optimistic now than I used to be. My wife will tell you that, and part of it is learning. Number one, that these rejections aren't always about you. Uh, Whether you're rejected for a part in a play, whether you're
Hmm.
rejected for your short story or whatever. I've had short stories that I've pitched to 30 different venues and pitched to 31, and it was accepted immediately because it exactly fit what they were looking for at that time.
Hmm.
And so that's something that's changed. You do become a little bit more optimistic, especially when you see that you can succeed.
Hmm.
You've succeeded in the past and you can succeed in the future. You've done it before. It makes it easier to do different things, try different things, because it makes public speaking easier. Again, you've done it before. I've been on stage and I've been in front of audiences. You learn a little bit more confidence.
Hmm. And again, I see that theme come through over and over and over again of you have the evidence, you have the evidence. If you look back and find the evidence, then there's the proof that you can do the thing. And I see how that can apply to you and all of and more than what you've shared with us. And I look at my own kind of life and I self-reflect on that and think about how I can lean on that more and how many of us can look to the past, not for evidence of our lack, but for evidence of our capability.
Yeah, I think people tend to underestimate what they can accomplish, what they have accomplished.
Hmm.
You see that in a lot of people trying to write resumes. My wife has helped. She's a professional editor. She
Hmm.
worked in nonfiction mostly. She's helped many people with their resumes or CVs. And she says, well, this time period, you just say here you worked at X and such corporation. What'd you do? Well, I
Hmm.
really didn't do much. Come on, you must have done. And then they start listing off things they did, and they were very accomplished at many things, which they belittled.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you learn that number one, uh, you've accomplished more than you think you have. But on the
Hmm.
flip side, you also have to learn, especially as a writer, we all think our writing is better than it is.
Hmm.
There's the old saying, kill your darlings. When you've written something that really you just think is brilliant, maybe 2 pages of a book,
Uh-huh.
and it just doesn't really fit, you have to learn to exit out.
Mm.
Save it, maybe you'd be able to use it someplace else.
Yeah.
People don't like to do that. And so, number one, you got to recognize you can do more than you think you can. And number two, you've got to recognize your limitations that, you know, you need to improve in this area.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, just what I'm hearing also is what you've learned and what has changed for you. Like you said, the resilience, the thick skin, but also just being really, really flexible. It also seems like, when you say you can succeed, you can do this, you can do hard things, all of those phrases, um, and that you absolutely can succeed, is that there's this element of kind of really getting clear on what you're succeeding at and who you're succeeding for, right? Like, I don't hear you talking about, you know, bending to please other people or trying to fulfill somebody else's vision or trying to mold yourself to other people's expectations. We don't really crack that open, but this is what I'm reading through what you're saying is you said earlier in the conversation, focus on what you already know and build on that, right? Doing the things you love, the things that interest you, so
And
it,
that's one thing about writing is people say, there's a trend. I want to write for that trend, or I want to
mhm,
write for a specific audience,
mhm,
or I don't want to offend this group. And it's like, you've got to write for you.
mhm, mhm.
I think, and most other writers, first of all, you have to be interested enough to write that 90,000 words,
Right.
um, and stick with it through the revision process and whatever. So you have
Mhm,
to like it enough to do that. And secondly, you can't look and try to guess what somebody is going to be offended by, what somebody is going to like or not like, or want to read or not read. You got to write what you like and
mhm.
hope there's an audience out there. I've heard comedy writers say this, like Phil Rosenthal from Everybody Loves Raymond, say the same thing. You write specifically what you think is funny, what your coworkers think is funny, and you hope that this is generalizable.
Mhm.
Other
A-
people will think it's funny, or other
And
people
and
will.
and or it's going to find the audience that it
Right.
gets, that gets it, right? I think about, how that relates to social media today, right? And I'm older than the generation that is really active on social media. I didn't grow up with it, but I have all the channels and everything. And this has been, I haven't written a book dot 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 yet. That may be in my future, I don't know, but I do write and I have written for a living, career wise and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But as I went back to being independently self-employed and so forth, how do you leverage social media and so forth? And I just, for me personally, I know there's many people who love this, but for me personally, the whole thought of no, you have to create certain types of content, you have to use certain types of hashtags, and you have to post on a certain type of frequency, and you have to use certain types of background music because those are the only things that are going to feed the algorithm and get you multiplication and so on and so forth. And it just, ugh, no, I can't. And that's kind of how I fell into the podcast is I
Yeah.
didn't want to do social media. I did the podcast instead. And I do
Well,
this because
you'll
it
hear
matters
lots
to
of
me.
people in writing too will say, especially like in thriller writing, and a lot of my writing is thriller. Not all of it. I've written
Hmm.
horror. I've written women's fiction. I have a book coming out in a couple of months that is more like a Hallmark movie than it is like a thriller.
Hmm.
And you'll hear people say there's rules. You can't have more than five main characters. You can't have more than 3 points of view. You can't do this. It can't go over 90,000 words. But.
Hmm.
And while it's good to think about those things, if you look at some of the real breakthrough books, they've all violated the rules. That's why
Game
they're
of
great.
Thrones, right?
And I have a friend, a very successful thriller writer, John Gilstrap. He writes the what's its name? It'll come to me in a minute. His character is one of his big characters, kind of a Jack Reacher type.
Hmm.
He goes, there are no rules. You can try to use some guidelines and things like that, but if you constrain, that's another part of constraining your writing. It's like
Hmm.
if you get too worried about the research, you constrain your writing. If you get too
Hmm.
worried about offending people, you constrain your writing.
Too focused on producing for mass and mainstream
Right. Or
consumption.
following a trend. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
yeah,
another stupid thing.
yeah, yeah. John, let's jump into the last of the five questions, and that is, what does getting off the comma look like for you?
Just keeping on. Keeping writing, trying to explore some new genres. Like I said, I stuff has come to me that I've written because I feel compelled to write it, even though it's not the typical stuff that I write.
Mm-hmm.
This women's fiction book that I have coming out in a couple of months, that was something I really felt compelled to write.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a thriller, which is what I've written before. Uh, Same with my horror book, which is under contract and should come out by the end of next year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so kind of spread your wings, and once you get a genre you're comfortable in, don't be afraid to explore other ones, as long as you don't get too far outside what your understanding is. I've
Mm-hmm.
run into writers like at conferences. They go, I'm gonna write a girls adventure book. You ever read any? No.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, well, maybe you want to read a couple and figure, number one, if that's something you want to spend your time doing, yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
enjoy doing it. And number two, uh, I've heard people say they want to write like a Harry Potter type of thing because that made a lot of money. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, first, is that what you like to do?
Mm-hmm.
So, there's that. Don't run off and try to do stuff that is either well outside your experience or something you don't enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're writing on something for 6 or 8 months just to get the first draft done, you better like doing it. You better like the characters and things like that,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's just too much to ask of yourself. So
Mm,
for me, it's just keeping on and growing as a writer.
okay. John, I so appreciate you sharing, this experience, sharing with us some of your experience with writing, letting me banter with you on kind of the what ifs and what abouts. And, there's so much in what you shared that really relates to, again, to whether it's writing, whether it's exploring, whether it's a new job, whether it's a new relationship. Like these themes all seem to really relate when it comes to self-reflection and kind of where do you want to go and that sort of thing. So I so appreciate you sharing all of that. I know there's much more you could share with us, but unfortunately podcasts have a container they have to stay within. As we wrap up, let's go to where could people find you? I'm going to put all your links in the show notes,
Okay.
but if people want to connect with you, they want to look up your books, they want to follow you on social media, where would you send people to connect with you?
My website that has most of the links to anything like my books and stuff. Even if they don't work all the
Mm.
time, you can cut and paste them into the browser. And that's Jay Bukowski. Excuse me, thrillerjohnb.net.
Mm, okay.
Thrillerjohnb.net. They can find me on Facebook. They can find me on X, Twitter. Um, the All my books are on Amazon and any place else that Ingram distributes, so Barnes and Noble or whatever. On Amazon, jbukowskiauthor.com gets you right to my Amazon page, which has all my books listed. Um, One thing I want to say to people, that I say this about any author you like, leave a review.
Mm,
People don't, even when they like the book, they don't think to do that. And it means so much, not only to the author's personal, somebody like my stuff.
hmm
Uh, it makes a difference on who's going to buy the book and things like that.
hmm
I also want to plug my latest thriller, which is The Peeper, and that you can also find on my author page, along with my
Nice.
other books, Project Suicide, Check Out Time, and Bad Pennies. And then
Okay.
my book coming out, And a Child Shall Lead Him, in December, hopefully. I want to, let people know about that too.
Okay. Great. John, the last thing that we do here on every podcast is, if the podcast itself is about hearing other people's stories, lifting up people's voices, your story wouldn't be complete today if we didn't give you an opportunity to acknowledge others. And so the section is called Acknowledgements, and it's your opportunity to give a voice to or lift up or boost others. And that can be organizations, causes, other creators, or just people in your life who are important to you. who would you like to acknowledge today? And I'll be sure to put that in the show notes as well.
Sure. Well, my wife, Susan, uh, like I said, she's an editor, so she generally gets the first crack at editing my book. She's my toughest critic and my most honest critic.
Mm,
And also been married to her for going to be 35 years in a couple of weeks. And
nice.
so that, and then a good friend of mine and a good writer in her own right, Elizabeth Haynes. She is one of my go-to people for beta reading. You know, when writers are writing, they get to the point where they've done a couple of drafts and now they want to get it out to people they trust and say, what do you think? Is what didn't you buy? What did you buy? What does it need more? Things like
Mm-hmm.
that. They call it beta reader.
Okay.
And she's a great one for that. I rely on her a lot. And I want to give a shout out to all of the veterans out there. My brother's a veteran, Vietnam vet. That's one of my big charities, our veterans groups like the USO and things like that, but also Wounded Warrior Project. That's so important because people get damaged defending our freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and they deserve the help.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. There have been other guests here who have also acknowledged the Wounded Warrior Project. I know that's very important, and um, sadly, my opinion is the folks who should be supporting that aren't supporting it enough, and those are the
Right.
people we elected in office. So I know there are folks out here in the citizenry who are doing that, and it's too bad it's not something that's more institutionalized, right? Um, Thank you so much, John. I appreciate everything that you have shared with us today and for joining our cast of storytellers here on Off the Comma, and look forward to following you more to see how your
Well, thanks,
journey
Paul. I
unfolds.
appreciate the opportunity, and maybe we can do it again when some other books come out.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, have a great weekend ahead, and we will definitely be following your story.
Thanks, Paul. Take care.
What an honor it is for me to hear and share these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way. Think about what you learned from this conversation. I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling or reflection, because surprises can reveal themselves to you when you write your thoughts down. If you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode and follow the podcast here on this platform and all social media at Off the Comma. Feel free to interact and comment. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.